Ladies and gentlemen, if you are enjoying my videos, please click the like button. It is the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. The Echoing Forest. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for You by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Unnatural Silence. Sunlight dappled the forest floor in a playful dance, casting shifting patterns on the soft bed of pine needles. The air hummed with a vibrant symphony of nature, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a woodpecker, the cheerful chirp of unseen songbirds, the rustling whisper of leaves swaying in a gentle breeze. 10-year-old Lily skipped ahead, her backpack bouncing rhythmically as she hummed a cheerful tune under her breath. Her parents, John and Sarah Miller, followed closely behind, their faces etched with the contentment of a perfect family getaway. "Isn't this amazing, Sarah?" John asked, his voice laced with a hint of awe. "So much quieter than the city." Sarah smiled, her eyes lingering on Lily's carefree form. "It's perfect," she agreed, a touch of unease creeping into her voice. She couldn't pinpoint it, but something felt off, a subtle dissonance in the otherwise idyllic scene. As they ventured deeper, the once vibrant symphony began to fade. The woodpecker's drumming ceased abruptly, replaced by an unsettling. Lily stopped skipping, a frown replacing her smile. The silence felt heavy, pressing down on them like a physical weight. John cleared his throat, the sound echoing unnaturally in the stillness. "Maybe it's getting late," he offered, his voice strained. "The birds probably head to roost earlier out here." But the silence wasn't peaceful. It felt oppressive, charged with a strange tension that made the hairs on the back of Sarah's neck stand on end. Lily shivered, her gaze darting nervously through the towering trees. Then it began a low, humming sound, almost inaudible at first, but growing steadily in intensity. It vibrated through the earth, resonating in their bones. John and Sarah exchanged a worried glance. The sound wasn't natural. It pulsed with an unsettling rhythm, an alien melody that sent shivers down their spines. Lily clutched her mother's hand, her voice barely a whisper. "Mommy, what is that?" Sarah knelt beside her, forcing a smile. "Just the forest, settling down for the night, honey. Nothing to worry about." But her own voice lacked conviction. The sound was unlike anything she'd ever heard, a primal vibration that wormed its way into her deepest fears. John, ever the pragmatist, shrugged it off. "Probably some local insect," he said, his voice unconvincing even to himself. But the humming grew louder, a hypnotic song that seemed to burrow into their minds. It tugged at them, urging them deeper into the forest, towards the source of the unsettling sound. Sarah felt a primal urge to turn back, to flee this unnatural silence, punctuated only by the growing hum. Yet, a morbid curiosity, fueled by a growing sense of dread, propelled them forward. As they walked, the forest floor grew spongier, carpeted with a thick layer of moss. The towering trees, once welcoming, now loomed overhead like silent sentinels, their branches gnarled and twisted in grotesque shapes. The humming intensified, a low, pulsating drone that filled their ears and vibrated in their chests. Lily whimpered, burying her face in her mother's side. John, his initial bravado fading, reached for Sarah's hand. His grip was tight, his knuckles white with suppressed fear. They were lost, adrift in a sea of unnatural silence, punctuated only by the ever-present hum. A horrifying realization dawned on Sarah. The silence wasn't a lack of sound. It was a presence, an unseen entity, waiting in the shadows, its purpose as chilling as the silence itself. Chapter 2. The Song of Bones. The hypnotic hum intensified, pulsing with a rhythm that resonated deep within their bones. It was more than a sound. It was a primal call, a siren song that tugged at them with an irresistible force. John, his initial skepticism replaced by a gnawing curiosity, found himself drawn deeper into the forest. "There must be an explanation," he muttered, more to reassure himself than anyone else. He squinted through the thickening darkness, his eyes searching for the source of the sound. Sarah, however, felt a cold dread grip her heart. Her intuition screamed at her to turn back, to flee this unnatural symphony. But John was already striding ahead, his pragmatic facade barely masking the growing fear in his eyes. Lily, her small hand clutching Sarah's with white-knuckled desperation, whispered, "Mommy, I don't like this place." Trees grew denser, their branches forming a tangled canopy that blocked out the fading sunlight. The air grew thick and humid, carrying the pungent scent of decaying leaves and damp earth. Forest floor became uneven, riddled with gnarled roots that snagged at their feet. Then, abruptly, the trees thinned, revealing a clearing bathed in an ethereal glow. In the center stood a colossal oak, its ancient branches reaching toward the sky like gnarled fingers clawing at the heavens. The bark, an unnatural shade of gray, pulsed with a faint luminescence that cast an eerie light on the scene. And at the foot of the oak, a horrifying tableau unfolded. A figure lay sprawled on the ground, its once human form twisted and contorted beyond recognition. Ribs protruded like a grotesque cage, its torso stretched and warped into a hollow soundbox. Long, skeletal fingers were fused to taut strings of what appeared to be bone, their ends attached to the gnarled branches of a nearby sapling. A sickening realization dawned on Sarah. This wasn't a human anymore. It was an instrument, a monstrous harp crafted from the flesh and bone of an unfortunate victim. The strings vibrated, emitting a haunting melody that blended seamlessly with the ever-present hum. A shriek tore through the air, a high-pitched, bone-chilling sound that echoed through the clearing. John stumbled back, his face drained of color. Lily, unable to hold back the rising tide of fear, let out a strangled sob. The monstrous harp trembled, the strings vibrating with renewed intensity. Then, a voice emanated from the instrument, a rasping whisper that seemed to crawl into their minds. "Welcome to the symphony." The air crackled with an unseen energy as the branches of the colossal oak twitched, seemingly coming alive. Clearing, once a place of eerie beauty, now felt like a macabre stage, and the millers, the unwitting audience. John, his bravado shattered, turned to Sarah, his eyes wide with terror. "We have to get out of here," he whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. Sarah, her face pale but resolute, nodded. They had stumbled upon a horrifying truth. The forest wasn't just silent. It was alive, a predator that preyed on sound. And their presence, their very breaths, had become a fatal melody. Now, they had to escape this monstrous orchestra before they became the next instruments in its symphony of the damned. Chapter 3. A silent struggle. Panic clawed its way up John's throat as the horrifying melody reached a crescendo. The monstrous harp seemed to writhe in agony, its strings thrumming against the warped bone. Sarah shoved him back, her desperate whisper echoing in his ears. "Run!" They didn't dare make a sound, their desperate flight fueled by sheer terror. Branches clawed at them in the thickening darkness, the ethereal glow of the clearing fading behind them. John, his mind reeling from the gruesome sight, tripped over a hidden root, crashing to the ground with a gasp that he choked back before it could escape. Sarah, fear a knot in her stomach, reached him in seconds, pulling him up with a frantic yank. She pointed ahead, her eyes wide. A faint glimmer of moonlight filtered through the dense canopy, offering a sliver of hope. They pushed forward, their movements a silent symphony of desperate scrambles and hurried whispers. Lily, usually full of chatter, was eerily silent. Her gaze darted nervously around them, searching for any sign of pursuit. John noticed a tear rolling down her cheek, a stark reminder of their precarious situation. He longed to comfort her, to express his own terror, but the silence pressed down on him, a suffocating weight. They emerged into a grove bathed in a silvery moonlight. Relief washed over John, momentary and fragile. But the silence, broken only by their ragged breaths, heightened their fear. How could they communicate, plan their escape, without a single word? Just then, Lily tugged on his sleeve, her eyes gleaming with a newfound determination. Pointing towards a towering oak, she sketched something in the dirt with a trembling hand. A circle with a spiral within it. John frowned, recognition dawning. "The symbols," he whispered, his voice strangely hoarse after so long without speaking. He remembered seeing similar symbols etched on trees during their pre-trip research. But what did they mean? An escape route? A warning? Frustration gnawed at him. He couldn't be sure, not without voicing his thoughts. The forced silence, meant to save them, now threatened to unravel their cohesion. He glanced at Sarah, her brow furrowed in concentration as she studied the symbol. Suddenly, Lily pointed in another direction, towards a faint path barely visible in the moonlight. Could it be a way out? But fear warred with logic. The entity, whatever it was, had chosen this clearing. Would straying from the path lead them deeper into danger? John looked at Sarah, his eyes pleading for guidance. For the first time, he understood the importance of her intuition, of the unspoken bond they shared. She squeezed his hand, a silent reassurance. Then, with a determined nod, she gestured towards the path. Taking a deep breath, John placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, offering a silent apology for their forced silence. Lily met his gaze, a flicker of defiance replacing her fear. Together, they followed the path, their hopes pinned on the cryptic symbols and driven by a desperate need for survival. As they ventured deeper, John couldn't help but glance back at the darkness from where they came. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for their next misstep, for the inevitable sound that would unleash its wrath. The silence, their only shield, had become a terrifying reminder of their constant vulnerability. Yet, as they walked, a silent resolve hardened within them. They would escape this macabre symphony, even if it meant navigating the forest in a world devoid of sound. Chapter 4. The Language of Symbols. Days bled into nights, measured only by the changing hues of the moon filtering through the dense canopy. The silence, once terrifying, became a familiar companion, punctuated only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the rumble of their growling stomachs. Hunger gnawed at them, but the fear of breaking the silence outweighed their need for food. Lily, ever resourceful, scavenged for edible berries and mushrooms, her finds meager but sustaining. John, relying on his faded memories of wilderness survival, fashioned crude tools from sharpened sticks and scavenged scraps. Sarah, her intuition, her guiding force, studied the recurring symbols etched into bark and fallen logs. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced the darkness, they stumbled upon a clearing unlike any they had seen before. In the center stood a fallen giant, its moss-covered trunk serving as a makeshift platform. Upon it, perched precariously, was a figure cloaked in ragged clothes, its face hidden in shadow. Hope flickered in John's eyes. Maybe another survivor? But as they drew closer, a sickening realization dawned on them. The figure, its body contorted into an unnatural posture, was no longer human. Its limbs were grotesquely elongated, ending in gnarled claws that tapped rhythmically against the fallen log. Its back was a canvas of raw flesh, stretched taut and vibrating with a faint hum. It was a monstrous drum, a gruesome testament to the entity's power. John gasped, the sound almost escaping his lips before he clamped his hand over his mouth. The inhuman drumming ceased abruptly, replaced by an unnatural stillness. Then, the figure whirled around, its hollow eyes locking onto them. Suddenly, a wave of nausea washed over Lily. The world spun, and the grotesque drummer dissolved into a swirling vortex of shadows. When the dizziness subsided, the clearing was empty. Had it been a hallucination, a cruel trick of the mind warped by silence? Fear prickled at Sarah's skin. Was this a warning? Were they losing their grip on reality? They needed answers, and the symbols were their only hope. Days later, as they navigated a labyrinth of twisted trees, they spotted another carving, a series of spirals branching out from a central circle. This time, Lily gasped. In a ragged whisper, she pointed to her own chest. The symbol on the tree, it mirrored the strange birthmark she'd always had. A shiver ran down John's spine. Was Lily somehow connected to this place, to the entity itself? Or was it just a coincidence? The silence offered no answers, only a chilling emptiness. Their journey then led them to a hidden cave, its entrance marked by a single colossal spiral carved into the stone face. Inside, they found remnants of a civilization long gone, crude drawings depicting a colossal, pulsating sphere hovering over a terrified populace and strange symbols that mirrored the forest carvings. A wave of dread washed over John. This entity, this cosmic horror, wasn't new. It had been here for millennia, preying on unsuspecting victims. But what were the symbols? A warning? A language? Were they closer to understanding the entity, or simply delving deeper into its madness? Exhausted, but fueled by a sliver of hope, they decided to take a chance. Using a piece of charcoal, they painstakingly copied the symbols from the cave wall onto their clothes. Maybe, just maybe, these markings would hold the key to their escape, or perhaps a sliver of understanding of the entity that held them captive in this silent, terrifying world. Chapter 5. Descent into Madness. Weeks bled into an indistinguishable blur. The constant strain of silent communication, the gnawing hunger, and the ever-present dread of the unseen entity chipped away at their sanity. John, once a pillar of pragmatic strength, grew withdrawn, his eyes haunted by a flicker of paranoia. One evening, as they huddled around a meager fire, frustration boiled over. Sarah, her face gaunt with hunger, gestured towards their dwindling supplies. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, but the fear of breaking the silence with the rustle of a wrapper was stronger. John, his jaw clenched, slammed a fist against the ground, a silent scream contorting his face. Lily, ever the mediator, sketched a picture in the dirt, a simple depiction of a fruit tree. Understanding dawned on Sarah. She pointed towards a distant path, the one they'd chosen days ago, based on an intuitive hunch. John nodded, a flicker of hope rekindled in his eyes. Their journey, however, was plagued by shifting realities. Familiar landmarks vanished, replaced by unsettlingly identical ones. The path they'd meticulously chosen seemed to contort and twist, leading them in endless circles. Were they lost, or was the entity manipulating the forest itself? One night, as John stood watch, a figure emerged from the shadows, a woman. She reached for him, a skeletal hand trailing a ragged cloak. In a voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind, she whispered, "Welcome." To the silence. John stumbled back, his hand instinctively going for a weapon that wasn't there. But the woman was gone, vanished quickly as she appeared. Had it been real? Exhaustion and stress were blurring the lines between reality and hallucination. Another night, Lily woke up screaming, her eyes wide with terror. She dreamt of a colossal, pulsating sphere. Her parents rushed to her side, their own faces etched with terror. The silence, once their shield, now amplified the internal scream echoing within them. John, his voice raspy from disuse, whispered a question that hung heavy in the air. Are we ever going to escape this? Sarah, tears welling in her eyes, clutched him close. We have to, she whispered back, her voice filled with a desperate resolve. Clung to each other, a frail island of hope in a sea of maddening silence. The next morning, they stumbled upon a clearing bathed in an unnatural, sickly green light. In the center stood a monumental sculpture, a twisted amalgamation of human forms fused together into a grotesque symphony orchestra. The sight was so horrific, so utterly alien, that it jolted them back to reality. This was no longer just about survival. It was about fighting back against this cosmic horror, this entity that preyed on sound and silence alike. A flicker of defiance ignited within them. They might be losing their grip on reality, but they wouldn't surrender to the maddening symphony of the damned. Chapter 6: A Desperate Choice. Despair gnawed at their minds like a hungry beast. The grotesque symphony sculpture loomed ahead, a stark reminder of the entity's power and their precarious situation. Sarah clutched Lily's hand, her face grim. The escape route marked by the symbols had vanished, replaced by a sheer cliff face, its base obscured by a swirling mist. Behind them, the familiar path seemed to twist and contort, leading them back to the maddening echoes of their screams from the previous night. John, his gaze darting nervously between the cliff and the approaching mist, mumbled, "We're trapped." Sarah shook her head, a spark of defiance igniting in her eyes. Not yet. She pointed towards a narrow, moss-covered crevice, snaking along the base of the cliff. It was barely wide enough for a single person, and the mist that clung to it churned with an otherworldly green glow. "It can't be safe," John whispered, fear evident in his voice. Lily, her chin set with newfound resolve, tugged at her parents' clothes. She sketched a crude picture in the dirt, a swirling vortex leading into a cavern. Was it a memory from her hallucination? Or a clue gleaned from the symbols they deciphered? A tense silence hung in the air. The choice was agonizing. The cliff path was a dead end, but the crevice seemed to lead right into the heart of the entity's domain. John knelt beside Lily, his voice gentle. "Do you remember what you dreamed about, honey?" Lily nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "A big, scary ball. Like the symbols." John's gaze met Sarah's. Could Lily's dream hold the key to their escape? Was the crevice a passage leading through the entity itself, a desperate gamble for freedom? Sarah squeezed John's hand, a silent communication passing between them. They had come too far to give up now. Together, they had faced horrifying sights and endured the crushing silence. It was time for a desperate gamble. With a shared look of determination, they helped Lily crawl into the crevice. The green mist swirled around her, momentarily obscuring her from view. Then, John followed, his heart pounding against his ribs. Sarah watched them disappear, her own fear gnawing at her. Was this the right choice? Had they condemned themselves and their daughter? Tears streamed down her face as she started crawling into the crevice. The green mist pressed against her, an icy touch that sent shivers down her spine. It pulsed with a faint hum, a low vibration that resonated in her bones. As she crawled deeper, she felt a strange pull, a force drawing her forward. Fear threatened to consume her, but the hope of seeing John and Lily again fueled her determination. The crevice narrowed, pressing against her body. She squeezed her eyes shut, the sound of her ragged breaths the only sound in the suffocating silence. Then, abruptly, the pressure eased. She opened her eyes to find herself in a vast cavern bathed in an ethereal green glow. In the center of the cavern pulsated a colossal sphere, the thing from Lily's dream. Tendrils of energy snaked through the darkness, connecting it to monstrous sculptures that resembled grotesque instruments of torture. And suspended midair, held in the entity's grasp, were John and Lily. Sarah let out a strangled gasp, the sound echoing through the cavern. They weren't safe. They were right in the heart of the entity's domain. But what they had discovered was worth the risk. Now, they had to find a way to turn the entity's power against itself, a desperate choice to break free from the Symphony of the Dam. Chapter 7: The Symphony of the Dam. Sarah's gasp echoed through the cavern, a stark intrusion into the Symphony of the Damned. The colossal sphere pulsed with an intensified light, its tendrils writhing like angry serpents. John and Lily, suspended midair, were bathed in the sickly green glow, their faces contorted in a mixture of fear and defiance. The cavern walls became alive with grotesque figures, the transformed victims Sarah had glimpsed before. Their bodies, twisted and warped, now served as macabre instruments. A man with a gaping maw for a chest served as a bellows, his ragged breaths fueling the symphony with a haunting moan. A woman, her arms stretched into taut strings, vibrated with a high-pitched whine. Each victim, a twisted instrument, contributed to the horrifying melody that resonated through Sarah's very bones. But the true horror lay in the realization that dawned on her. This wasn't just a spectacle of pain. It was a conduit. The entity, this pulsating sphere, fed on the emotions it amplified through its victims' transformations. The fear, the despair, the very essence of their silence fueled its power. A wave of nausea washed over Sarah as she understood the entity's purpose. It wasn't just hunting for victims. It was a cosmic parasite, feeding on the negative emotions it instilled in those unfortunate enough to stumble into its domain. The silence, the forced lack of communication, was a cruel tool to amplify their fear. A twisted symphony conducted by the entity itself. But amidst the horrifying spectacle, Sarah saw a glimmer of hope. The symphony, fueled by their emotions, was also their weakness. If they could break the cycle of fear, disrupt the flow of negative emotions, they might weaken the entity's hold. John, his eyes locked on hers, seemed to understand. He strained against the tendrils that held him captive, his face contorted in silent defiance. Lily, tears streaming down her cheeks, met Sarah's gaze and offered a small, shaky smile. Suddenly, Sarah knew what she had to do. Fear wouldn't break this, wouldn't save them. They had to fight back, not with violence, but with a defiant joy, a mockery of the entity's attempt to control their emotions. With a deep breath, Sarah forced a smile onto her face. Then, she began to sing. It was a simple song, a childhood lullaby she used to sing to Lily. Her voice, raw with emotion, echoed through the cavern, a stark counterpoint to the Symphony of the Damned. John joined in, his voice hoarse but resolute. Lily, her fear momentarily forgotten, chirped along, her voice ringing clear and pure. The cavern walls vibrated with the unexpected melody, the grotesque instruments faltering in their macabre performance. The entity pulsed with a blinding light, its tendrils thrashing in anger. The monstrous instruments shrieked in protest, their amplified sounds becoming distorted, disharmonious. The symphony, once a terrifying force, began to crumble under the weight of their defiance. Sarah pushed her voice, singing louder, pouring her love for her family into every note. John and Lily sang along, their voices filled with a newfound hope. Slowly, The grotesquely transformed figures began to shimmer, their bodies flickering back to their human forms. With a final, earth-shattering scream, the entity imploded. The cavern plunged into darkness, the symphony replaced by a deafening silence. Sarah, John, and Lily, battered but alive, tumbled to the cavern floor. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness, they saw each other whole and unharmed. The silence, once their enemy, now felt like a warm embrace, a shared victory. They had faced the symphony of the damned and emerged stronger, their love and defiance, their only weapons. Chapter 8, Breaking the Silence. Disoriented and bruised, they emerged from the cavern. The once vibrant forest was shrouded in an unnatural twilight, the silence broken only by the ragged gasps of their own breaths. Had they truly defeated the entity, or was this just another trick, a cruel illusion before a final, fatal blow? John, the pragmatist in him reasserting itself, scanned their surroundings. He noticed the symbols they'd painstakingly copied were etched into the bark of nearby trees, glowing faintly with a soft green light. Could they be the key to escape, or perhaps a permanent change wrought by their defiance? Lily tugged at Sarah's sleeve, pointing toward the distant path. It was the one they'd chosen days ago, based on intuition and the cryptic symbols. Was it the same path, or another cruel twist by the entity? Uncertainty gnawed at them, but a newfound resolve burned brighter. They had faced the symphony of the damned and emerged stronger. They wouldn't succumb to fear now. Following the path, they walked for what felt like hours, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic crunch of leaves underfoot. The forest, once a place of horrifying beauty, now seemed oddly muted, devoid of the vibrant sounds of life. Had they broken the cycle of silence, or was this a chilling harbinger of the entity's defeat? As the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, they stumbled upon a familiar sight, the clearing where they'd first encountered the monstrous harp. But this time, the clearing was bathed in sunlight, the air filled with the chirping of birds. The silence, their constant companion, was finally broken. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. They had escaped. They were free, but a chilling truth settled upon them. The forest, once teeming with life, was strangely quiet. The bird song, though a welcome melody, seemed sparse, tentative. Had they broken the entity's hold, or had they merely escaped, leaving the forest forever scarred by its presence? John knelt beside a fallen log, tracing the familiar symbols carved into its bark. Did they hold the key to healing the forest, or were they a grim reminder of the horror they'd faced? Lily, her gaze fixed on the horizon, whispered, "Will the bad music come back?" Sarah knelt beside her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "We don't know, honey," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "But we'll face it together, just like we faced it this time." They emerged from the forest, blinking in the harsh sunlight of the real world. The silence, once terrifying, now felt strangely comforting. They had survived the symphony of the damned, forever marked by their ordeal. The forest, however, remained silent, a chilling reminder of the entity's power and the uncertain peace they had earned. As they walked away, their gazes lingered on the dark tree line, a silent promise hanging in the air. They would never forget the forest, the entity, or the terrifying symphony they had silenced.